licensed clinical psychologist and professor in the College of Social Work at the University of Kentucky. Her research is focused on suicide exposure and suicide bereavement, suicide attempt survivors, and suicide prevention. She currently serves as president of the American Association of Suicidology, and Dr. Cerel completed her PhD from The Ohio State University, an internship and postdoctoral fellowship from West Virginia University, and a postdoctoral fellowship specifically in suicide prevention from University of Rochester. She has served as Research Division Chair and Board Chair of the American Association of Suicidology, and is the author of over 65 academic publications, along with being co-author of the book Seeking Hope, Stories of the Suicide Bereaved. And among many other things that I continue to learn about Dr. Cerel, I'm discovering that she's a very generative, generous, and kind individual. And I'm so glad that she can be here at BYU with us to teach us about her research and to share some of her personal experiences with us about suicide. So thank you, Judith.
Thank you so much. I'm here to talk about our research on how suicide impacts us, but I understand that when I give talks like this, lots of people are affected by suicide and have personal experiences. And so at the end, I'll leave my slide on some resources, both locally and nationally for people. And I know that the Counseling and Psychological Services CAPS has said that anyone who needs crisis services can be seen today. So if you feel like you need some help right away after the talk, find one of us and we'll figure out a way to get you over there to them. Also, if you have questions, please raise your hand, ask them when you think of them. I'll try and acknowledge you and maybe finish up my thought before I ask it. But I'm always of the opinion that if I raise my hand and have a question, I'm not going to remember what it is 30 minutes from now. But hopefully we'll also have time for questions at the end. So I want to just define some terms to start. Exposure is this idea that suicide can affect any of us. I was at the gym with my daughter watching her team practice, and one of the other moms came up to me and said, I wanted to talk to you. Our next door neighbor killed himself last week. He'd lost his job, but we're all so surprised. He left a wife and 2 kids. And then there's bereavement. My daughter's former teacher sent me a text. Julie, I'm devastated to tell you my beautiful 18-year-old son died by suicide this week. I'm on the floor now, but I know that his father, his 20-year-old brother, and I will need to get help in dealing with this heartbreak. So I'm going to be spending some time talking about this difference and why it matters, exposure versus bereavement. Just to give some context about suicide in the U.S., the latest numbers came out a few weeks ago, and 47,000 people in the U.S. die by suicide every year. It's 10th leading cause of death. It's primarily men that die by suicide. About half of them, the firearm is the method of death. And the age range is mostly people 45 to 64, but also over 6,000 who are 15 to 24, and a little more who are over age 65. There's one U.S. suicide death every 11.1 minutes. We're going to be in here for an hour together. So I just want you to think about the number of friends and sons and sisters and mothers that will be lost in that time. There's over 1 million people in the U.S. that attempt suicide annually. Suicides outnumber homicides 2 to 1. So we hear all the time in the news about murders, but really suicide is much more of a public health issue. And then in Utah, unfortunately, Utah has the 81st rate. It's about 663 deaths a year, lives lost in our state. This is why I'm here to continue on with my exposure. I'm going to talk about the word continuum more. I didn't know any of these people before they died by suicide, really. I'd met a couple of them a couple of times. But their loved ones have become involved in suicide postvention and suicide prevention work, and so they're the real reason I'm here. And they're the ones that really fuel the work that I continue to do. Because I want their loved ones and other loved ones to not have the kinds of experiences that they had after the deaths of these incredible people. And I understand that some of you might be here because a student died on campus in December that many of you might have known. And it's really, from everything I've heard, had a profound impact. on BYU. Suicide bereavement is different from other causes of death because people get treated differently. So the kinds of quotes we hear from people are, people who've been our closest friends have seemed to disappear from our lives after our son's suicide. People crossing the street to avoid talking to people who are suicide bereaved. Or I've received text messages that I was to blame for my son's death, said I'm a bad mother and I should just kill myself too. Or someone told me I didn't deserve to grieve since my husband chose to die. So people who are bereaved by suicide are getting all sorts of messages that are very different than they get when the cause of death of their loved one is not suicide. Traditionally, we've said that about 6 people are left behind following every suicide. That was a statement from Ed Schneidman, who's the person we call the father of modern suicidology. And that number has persisted despite no research at all for 30 years. And so that includes mostly family members, but part of what I'll be talking about today is moving away from that number and thinking much more broadly about how suicide affects communities. Suicide bereavement has a lot of unique, it's similar in some ways to bereavement from other sudden traumatic causes of death, but it leaves us with lots of questions. Why? What does that noise? What could I have done? If only I had done this, if only I had said this. Maybe I'm to blame, maybe the breakup, maybe because we had that fight or that conversation. Anger, how could they have done that to us? How could they have left me behind? And shame, I don't want to talk to people about how I lost this person. Because suicide is often been thought of as shameful. As I said before, suicide has really been focused, our thoughts about bereavement have really been focused on family, but it's really important to think beyond family. When you're living in a college community, when you're at a workplace, in a community of faith, it's not just your kin, it's the people that you're spending a lot of time with, and we need to think about how suicide creates risk in those communities and how to help them. So the first thing I want to talk about is how many people are exposed to each suicide, which is a lot of the work we've been doing recently. My hope is that when I'm done today, that I'll have you stop using this idea of 6 survivors per suicide based on that approximation from Schneidman in the 1970s. When people asked him over time, where did this number come from? He said a couple different things. One is, well, there was this plane accident, there was some litigation, and 6 is the number of people that were compensated. You know how that works. Or it was another lawsuit, bodies were double buried in the cemetery, and it was 6 people that were compensated. Regardless, it's based on just 6, and that's about as much thought probably as went into it. And so, trying to figure out the evidence, how does suicide affect us? How many people? Because we know it's not just 6. Any one of you could tell me it's not just 6, just by basis of being here. It minimizes this effect that suicides have across communities, and it really doesn't help us do prevention work or postvention, which is work that we do after a suicide takes place. It's important to think of, over the years when I started this work, people are like, are you a lost survivor? And it's like, well, I haven't lost a direct family member, but then I think back to that continuum, those photos of people who are very dear to me, and I feel like I knew all of them. It's not just a yes-no question in my mind, because we have a wide range of experiences with suicide loss, and also with attempts and people with lived experience, and that really needs to influence the work that we do and how we can help people. So we came up with this idea that suicide exposure really should be on a continuum. That there's a certain number of people in the population that are exposed to suicide, kind of the big number, and of those people that are exposed, by exposed, we define that pretty broadly. Do you know someone personally? It could even be not just personally, but we've had lots of notable celebrities that have died by suicide that have been very public in recent years. And that can be an exposure piece as well. Some people are exposed and it doesn't really affect their lives. They think about it, they're sad, but that's about it. Some people it affects them. They have nightmares for a few days, or they can't sleep, or they're really sad and they just can't get their work done. That's typical and often happens to many people. We don't quite know how many yet, but things get back to the usual way of things. They don't really need help professionally. or to go to a support group, or maybe they talk about it with their friends. Some people do need help, and that's the suicide bereaved group, either short-term or long-term. Some people need individual therapy. Some people, it will kind of lead to their own feelings of suicide for the first time in their lives. Or if they've had previous experiences with suicide, some people who lose someone close to them become suicidal. And so it's not a yes or no. It's not, are you suicide bereaved or not? Because there's this wide range of this continuum. We think about who could fit in each of these categories. Anyone really could fit into any of these categories. But it's more likely that people are going to have a long-term bereavement. I realize that this is not close enough to my face for most of you to hear me. Can you guys actually hear me in back? Good. That people who are most likely to be bereaved long-term are family members, therapists, or close friends. But anyone in any category could go there. People who are exposed are anyone really. First responders, or anyone who discovers someone who's died by suicide, family members, therapists, close friends, healthcare workers, community members, schools and workplaces, acquaintances, fans of celebrities, community groups. I work with a lot of Australians, so we have to say sporting clubs as well, or rural or close-knit communities. And so when you think about the range of people who can be exposed, and then channeling it down to those who are bereaved, really it's anyone, but these are the ones that are most likely. But the exposed piece is what I'm going to be talking about as we think about what are some groups that have high exposure. So who is exposed to suicide? We've been fortunate to have a couple of big studies that we've done. One was a random digit dial study, so we were those annoying people that called your phones and kept calling until you said, please do not call me back ever. And that was funded by the Military Suicide Research Consortium. We had 931 veterans and 805 non-veteran members in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And then we also had some questions in a door-to-door survey, which I was surprised to know that still existed, and that people ever answered their doors. They do. We had 1,432 people in the General Social Survey, which is a survey that happens every other year. It's been going back since the 60s. But in the last administration, we were the first time to be able to ask about suicide exposure. And those 1,432 people, we had them so that they were representative. They were kind of weighted to look like the U.S. as a whole. Because my collaborator said, well, Kentucky doesn't look like the U.S. He lives in New York. So when we asked, do you know anyone who's died by suicide, pretty consistently, from study to study, what we've been finding is it's about half of us. Half of Americans know someone that's died by suicide, personally. Then we asked, so how do we figure out who those people are? Are they people who live in rural areas? Are they veterans? Are they men? Are they women? And actually, there's no differences in demographics of who knows someone that's died by suicide, which is pretty, which after we got over our initial shock of, wow, that's so surprising, we thought it would be this group or this group, but suicide kind of goes across a lot of different age ranges and groups and rural and urban areas, and so it's not surprising that the people that are left behind look kind of like the people that died by suicide. In Kentucky, the only significant difference was race. The number of suicides by people of color is significantly less than for white people, and so we would expect that less people of color would know someone that had died by suicide. When we had that door-to-door survey, we added all sorts of new demographics that we were wondering if exposure matters, and it doesn't. Level of education, region of the country, religion, social class membership, average household income, political ideology, finding life exciting, and patterns of socializing. None of these predict whether or not you're going to know someone who's died by suicide. So this is the General Social Survey, the national sample. 52% of the population reported one or more lifetime suicide exposures. They knew at least one person. And then we asked them if it had a significant impact on their life. That's how we define bereaved. Of those, a third of the people who were bereaved, 21% of them were bereaved from one suicide, and 14% from more than one suicide. So this idea that typically it's not just one suicide that really affects us, but that people know more than one person that's died by suicide. And then we also ask about relationships. And I didn't limit it in many of the studies we've done, I've just said to people, how do you know them? They were my blank, because we found out if you ask them, how do you know them? Someone would say mother. Was it your mother or are you their mother? And so we had to say they were my blank. Most people are friends in the population when you're just looking kind of generally at surveying people. Third of the people was friends. That included best friend or good friend. The next most common category was cousin. I always tell people I'm from Kentucky, we have lots of cousins. So maybe that accounts for it. Work colleagues, and it differs maybe if it's your boss or if it's just a coworker, if it's just somebody you know from work, or maybe it doesn't. Because we oversee with veterans, many of them were military relationships, acquaintances. And then there's these unique categories that really continue to get me thinking. Someone said it was they were a fan of my band, and they were always on the front row, and then they weren't. Someone else said that it was someone who had gone through recovery in AA with them. What's it like to go through recovery and have that struggle, and then the person's no longer there? Another person said babysitter. That really got me thinking. Is a babysitter who has watched your kids once or twice, or a college friend after I was, actually a high school friend after I'd been doing a lot of the speaking, found them on Facebook and told me that their nanny who had lived with them, she had twins, or she had a daughter and then she had twins within 2 years. So she had 3 kids under the age of 2. And so they had a live-in nanny for 2 years with them and left their employment and 6 months later to her life. That's more like a child or a sibling to have that kind of loss. And so I have these categories, but sometimes we have to think deeper than these categories because they have meanings to each of us. And so just the name of the category doesn't necessarily represent what their life meant to the person who lost them. So of those who were exposed, who's a survivor, who's personally affected? And that word suicide survivor has now kind of morphed into suicide loss survivor. It's still not my favorite word because people aren't going to Google suicide loss survivor when they lose someone they care about for suicide. But it's the best we have so far. So we asked what makes someone personally affected following suicide. And again, these demographic characteristics aren't what did it. It didn't matter if you were male or female, or the person you lost was male or female, or your race, or whether you lived in an urban or rural place, or even the number of people who someone had lost to suicide. That's not what made them a survivor. What made them a survivor is their perception of their relationship. So the people who said, yes, I was very close to them, were more likely to feel like this is a loss that had really affected them than someone who didn't feel close at all. This slide is just really pretty and I like showing it, but it's really hard to interpret. So if you're going, what do all those pretty graphs mean? You're not alone. Essentially, what this graph is showing is, this is from the General Social Survey, and it has, the red is exposed, the orange is bereaved, and the yellow is multi-bereaved. And what we find is that, so first-degree relatives, for example, are more likely to be in that bereaved or multi-bereaved category than acquaintances. But if you look at friends, it looks pretty darn similar to first-degree relatives. And so losing friends is really just as important in our perception of that loss and what we need afterwards. And that's why this is important beyond the fact that it's true. And it also, the relationship, a lot of the times people ask, well, is it if you're kin to them, or if it's a first-degree family or a coworker? And so what we looked at is we asked about closeness on a 5-point scale, and we also asked about impact. How much impact did this have on your life? From none to it completely changed everything about my life, and I still feel it. And what you can see is that for first-degree families, 70% of them were highly close, but 30% weren't. And about half of them had very high impact after suicide, but half of them didn't. Friend, the closeness was there, the impact was less, and then coworker was pretty similar. And so these relationships, different relationships have different impact on different people, but just because someone says, well, it's just someone that lived on my home, doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to have a tremendous impact on their life. So how does exposure to suicide influence mental health symptoms? The short answer is it has some impact on mental health symptoms in terms of we look at people who are exposed compared to people who were unexposed, and what we found is that it doubled the rates of depression, almost doubled the rates of symptoms of anxiety, and increased suicidal ideation over 1.5 times. So the act of knowing someone, or reporting that you knew someone who died by suicide, is a big variable that can have some impact on people's future mental health needs. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen to everyone, as you saw before, but it's just something to think about and something to continue to be part of the conversation. And hopefully mental health professionals will begin to feel this and ask, not just, do you have a family of history of suicide, but have you been close to anyone that's died by suicide? Again, it was closeness that really seemed to be driving who was having the most problems. So when we looked at depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and prolonged grief, it was the people who felt like they were close to the person who died by suicide who was far more likely to have these problems following the death. And in fact, time since the death, so some of these deaths in our phone survey had occurred, I think on average it was 14 years ago. Time since the death didn't seem to matter at all. Recently, we've been thinking a lot about specific groups of people. So in our work life, who are people? There are lots of people who might be exposed to suicide just in the regular course of their jobs. Military and National Guard, the rates are high in the numbers of our forces, especially National Guard members, so that's where we started. And then we started thinking about law enforcement and first responders, and then therapists, physicians, and nurses, teachers and college professors, faith leaders and clergy, crisis workers, prison guards. There's lots of professions where people just can't help being exposed to suicide. And so some of these studies are ongoing, and I won't be talking about them yet, but I'm going to talk about the ones that we have wrapped up. The first one was on veterans, and it was from the Military Suicide Research Consortium funding. We were able to interview a lot of these veterans. This is a veteran who experienced the suicide of a buddy about more than 10 years ago. And he said that when he ran into a tough time in his life, he said, well, I was thinking if he can do it, escape from his problems, maybe I could too. But I really hadn't thought about it until I was going through some hard times 5 years ago when I started thinking about it the most. This idea that losing someone to suicide really has that idea there and is more cognitively available to us when we go through rough times. Did a study with Craig Bryan at the University of Utah and Annabelle Bryan, and he had a sample of 971 members of the National Guard here in Utah and in Iowa, and what he found is that 65% of National Guard members knew someone that had died by suicide, a lot more than the 50% I talked about in the national samples. And again, this perceived closeness to the person that died by suicide was the variable that was associated most with psychiatric variables. PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempt. And then for this sample, the number of people that someone knew by suicide was also important. And sometimes we found that the number of people is important and sometimes it isn't. But knowing that there's these variables, closeness, number of people, time since lost, sometimes they're important and sometimes they're not. More recently, we've done a study of law enforcement officers. We had about 800 law enforcement officers from across the U.S., and we asked them, on average, they'd been involved in law enforcement for 10 years. Almost all of them responded to at least one suicide scene, and over the course of their career, they responded to an average of 30 suicide scenes. That's a lot of trauma that they've been exposed to. In the last year, that's about 2.2 scenes. And when we asked them, do you have a scene that stays with you the most or you can't shake? Almost half of them said yes. And then we said, is there a scene you can't shake so much that you have nightmares or you just can't stop thinking about it? And 1 in 5 of the officers said yes in this anonymous survey. And then almost 3/4 knew someone in their personal lives who had died by suicide. So they have this personal exposure and the professional exposure. We've been looking at the open-ended data. How and why does the suicide stick with you? The most that we hear about is flashbacks, frequent visual images, rumination of intrusive thoughts, difficulty with nightmares or sleep issues, but a lot of the officers talked about the pain of the people that were at the scenes and how hard it was to see that pain. There was a lot of detail about being fixated on details of the death and smells, which is something which wouldn't have occurred to me for law enforcement. The fact if it was a child or young adult or they knew the family. In small communities, a lot of the time law enforcement knows families. Also wishing they'd seen the signs, the graphic nature of scenes, the method, when they pass the scene, so if it's part of their normal course or their normal beat, and they have to go there every day. Being similar to someone they knew, if it was the first scene in their career, or if it was someone elderly or who really wanted law enforcement involvement, wanted an officer to shoot them, who wanted to know. The kinds of quotes we heard from our officers, whenever I hear someone, something about suicide, I can see about 2 of the 3 past ones in my head right away. Or a smell will trigger the thought, or I can't shake the image of what the scene is like. I carry it like it's a part of me now. I think of the victim all the time, and I drive past the scene of her suicide almost every shift. I wish I'd seen the signs the suicide was going to happen. So this is something for many of them that occurred in the natural course of their job. And most of the time when we think about law enforcement and the jobs they do, we don't think about them responding to things like this, suicide scenes. So a little bit of a wrap up of what I've talked about so far. We know that more than half the population has lifetime exposure to suicide. About a third reports bereavement and significant negative impact from 1 or more suicides. Suicide exposure and bereavement, as I showed, were associated with more mental health problems. And we know that the effects of suicide lingers long afterwards. The average length of time before we surveyed people was 14 years. We know that first-degree relatives are more likely to have problems and need treatment, but other relationships can really be forgotten members, and it really depends on people's personal explanation of that relationship they have with the person who died. So how many people are exposed to each suicide? I've been using the not 6 hashtag for a while now because it's not 6, it's tremendously more. It just took us a long time to be able to have the right numbers to do the math. It's completely math. For those of you who like to do math, here's the way to do it. I did it on my phone calculator once I had the right numbers because my statistician was like, it's not statistics, it's just math. I'm like, okay, I can do that. We accounted for the number of lifetime exposures people told us they had and their age. So if you're 80, there are more years in your life that you could have encountered people about suicide. So we took into account someone's age. We also looked at the number of suicides in Kentucky, because this is Kentucky data. We did it with national data and we did it with Kentucky data and just decided to go with the Kentucky data, but we recognize that people can get exposed to suicides all over the world, not just in our state. But essentially what we found is 135, not 6. Does it matter if it's 136 or 137 or 128? I don't care. Someone's going to do a better study and hopefully they'll find a better number, but it's not 6. Each suicide leaves behind at least 135 people. And it's whole communities and workplaces and schools and communities of faith who struggle to try and figure out how do we live without this person? How do we answer those why questions? How do we deal with the anger we have over why they took their life? Why couldn't they have picked up the phone and called me? I would have helped them in any way. Approximately, thinking about kind of closeness, about a third of people report they're close or highly close to the people that they lose by suicide. So approximately, our statistician doesn't like to let me talk about this in terms of definites. You know, this statistician. Lawyers, statisticians like to go on and on. But it's about 48 people for every death by suicide. We don't have, our mental health systems don't have the capacity to see 48 people after every death by suicide in a meaningful way and help them. But it's not just first-degree relatives, that's the important thing. I haven't redone this with 2017 numbers. We know 47,000 people died by suicide each year in the U.S. If you multiply that by 135, that's about 6.2 million people in the U.S. every year exposed to suicide. If about a third of them are close, that's almost 2 million of us. It's a lot of people. It's not 6. So what is it that lost survivors need? I could spend the next 10 hours talking about that, but I won't. One of the things we heard is therapy. We send people to therapy all the time, but do therapists really know how to help people grieve by suicide? I work with a clinician, Vanessa McGann, who does a lot of work in private practice with people bereaved by suicide. She heard horror stories. And so we did a survey of almost 200 people across the U.S. Most of them had lost close family members, child, sibling, or parent, and it had been about 6 years since the loss. And actually what we found is most people said that therapy was beneficial to them. For all of us therapists, I was like, oh, at least we're doing something. And only a few of them reported therapy wasn't beneficial, and only a few of them reported that their therapist identified personally as a survivor. That's the good news. The bad news is almost 2/3 of the people in our study met criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder based on the screening we did, but only 39% of those reported that a therapist or physician had ever formally diagnosed them with PTSD. So that's just not something that's on clinicians' radars. And we heard things like, it helped me to know I had PTSD, and knowing that helped me get the right kind of help. Or, my counselor was helpful at the time, but I really wish she'd given me tools or exercises to deal with the PTSD and reoccurring images. And for many of the people with PTSD, they hadn't seen their loved one after the death, so they hadn't been at the scene. And a lot of the times I think clinicians think, well, if you're not exposed to the actual physical trauma, you can't have PTSD, and that's really not the case. We also heard some really bad things about what clinicians did or said that were not helpful. He tried to do most of the talking because he thought I was paying to listen to him and the information he had to give. I figured out that's why our sessions would last for 2 hours. Sometimes it felt like she was faking compassion. She said nothing. I talked to a wall, a disinterested wall. The guy was a basket case, and I resent having to pay to take care of my therapist. If you have a therapist like that, you can go elsewhere. And I think that's something people don't realize. Another question we get all the time is, should I tell people that my loved one died by suicide? Should I conceal it or should I disclose it? And really what we found, we did another survey of about 160 suicide-bereaved participants that we recruited for online studies. We were looking at people's experiences with their primary care physicians, but we also asked them if they disclosed. We had a scale about being easier to talk to, and then we had 2 general disclosure attitude statements. If others find it awkward or uncomfortable to mention my lost loved one in conversation, it's better for me not to bring it up, or I feel ashamed to talk publicly about my loved one's death. And what we found is that easy to talk now scale, that people felt like they could actually talk about it, and the time since loss accounted for 1/3 of the explained variance in the grief difficulties people were having. So if people felt like they could talk about it, that was 1/3 of the difficulties they were having. And so for us, it really is changing this idea that you shouldn't be talking about suicide. Just like cancer in the 1970s, people would, she died of the S word, or the C word, sorry. Suicide is the S word. And it's really time to start changing the way we talk about it, like any other cause of death. So if you're exposed to the suicide of someone close to you, talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it, because other people probably have similar experiences and they're afraid to talk about it. And get help if you can't shake it from your mind or you have nightmares or re-experiencing. Those are symptoms of PTSD. If you feel like you're going through it all over again, or you kind of flash to that scene and you can't shake it from your mind, even if you weren't there, even if it's just what you imagine the person you're close to is going through, that's a time to get some help. There's also this idea of post-traumatic growth that I really like talking about, even though I'm still puzzling over it in my mind. The idea that some of us go through these horrible situations that we can barely imagine, worse things in our lives, and it makes us better people. It's not just resilience, the idea that kind of we get over bad events, but it radically changes the course of our lives. This positive psychological change that's experienced as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances. My collaborator, Melinda Moore's dissertation was based on this, 154 parents who had lost a child due to suicide. And what she found is it's not resilience. In fact, there's an inverse relationship. People who are going to be resilient, who are going to bounce back after something bad occurs, they're not the people who have post-traumatic growth. It's the people who really struggle in the face of these really challenging life events that end up in a positive place they want to be. That could be personally, it could be in their faith, or it could be professionally. So I have several friends who are suicidologists who hadn't finished college when they lost a loved one. and went back and finished college and got a master's degree or a PhD because they want other people to not go through what they're going through. So that's what post-traumatic growth is. So in terms of suicide bereavement, the important thing is that it's unique, and it's not just like other kinds of traumatic losses. Don't be afraid to talk about your feelings. Guilt, shame, and stigma are common. It's important to seek help if you feel suicidal or have symptoms of PTSD or depression. There might be growth or hope after the suicide, this idea of post-traumatic growth. And we don't really know what helps most people after a suicide. Lots of people go to groups, individual therapy might help, some people activism might help. So now I want to shift gears just for a few minutes and talk about attempt survivors. There's lots of people, far more people live through suicide attempts or feeling suicidal, and then they get to the other side of it. These are some people who are attempt survivors who really influenced my life, and I'm glad they're still around because I'm still learning from them. But we don't know where in this continuum it affects us. Sometimes people who attempt suicide will die by suicide, so they'll put us into this bereavement. But sometimes, are they one circle, are they two circles? I'm still trying to piece this out in my own head, figuring out really how does exposure to attempt survivors affect us. But the important thing is that many more of us have this experience than people who have the experience. Just realized that those of you over there don't know that I don't have a line. Many more of us have this experience because there's many more suicide attempts in the world. So we've done some studies at the population level, at the college student level, and about 60 to 65% of people listening who's attempted or died by suicide. And so it's more common. But we don't have a lot of examples of what it looks like to survive a suicide attempt, or who are people who've survived. This is one of my favorite examples of people who have survived suicide attempts. Desiree Stage is the person with the rat on her shoulder who isn't in this. Is she there? No, she's not there. But she is a photographer and was a graduate student in psychology and then wasn't, and then was suicidal and had a suicide attempt. And she got to a place in her life where she wanted to talk about it and think about it. And if you Google suicide attempt survivors, you don't get a lot of good role models of people. And so she decided to start this project, Live Through This, in which she goes around the country. Right now there's 180 stories. She talks to people, she interviews them, listens to their story, and then takes a photograph, the headshot. And all of these stories are available online. You can even search the website. It looks better than this. They revamped it. And so you can see that suicide attempt survivors don't live just one way. We've been working with Desiree and looking at some of the data from the attempt survivors and some of the stories. And we hear things like, I don't want to share my thought of suicide or information about my prior attempts because I'm afraid. I'm always afraid people will find out and hold it against me. We look at who people tell. People say, I haven't been stigmatized much, but I haven't disclosed about my suicide attempt. Or I didn't let anyone know until 20 years later. Or I've only told one person that I attempted suicide, but she wasn't judgmental. We're trying to figure out how people can disclose in a way that's helpful, and they're more likely to seek help is important. There's a document called The Way Forward. It's from the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, the Suicide Attempt Survivor Task Force, and what we found from that is that what attempt survivors say they need is a connection and acknowledgement that people can attempt suicide and be in a place in their lives where they're doing okay and they can contribute to suicide prevention and meaningfully to the world at large. Decreases in stigma, but also the right reaction when they disclose. Not people saying, you know, what kind of idiot are you? You have a wife, you have kids. For those of you who are clinicians, I just wanted to point out a resource. The American Association of Suicidology has a clinician survivor task force, so it's a chance that people who have personal and professional losses to suicide can go and get some help there. It's a listserv, you can even post anonymously. So there are many more people touched by suicide than commonly thought. It's not 6. It's about 90 million suicide-bereaved adults who are now in the U.S., and that's about equal to the population of the 3 largest states in the U.S., California, Texas, and Florida combined, if you put all of us together. Even if we define survivorship conservatively as only those greatly distressed about the death, that's about 18% of the US population. That's not just a handful of people. It's about 45 million people, that's nearly double the current population. So please don't say there's only 6 survivors for every suicide. Know that exposure to suicide influences a wide variety of people. Understanding stigma is real, changes people's ability to get help after a loss. Know that it really is good to talk about your losses. And really stop using that 6 survivors for every suicide. One of my missions for a while. A psychologist that was in lived through this says it's important because I think there's a lot of us, and I really think that we're afraid to tell our story because we're afraid we're going to lose our jobs. People are going to take our degrees away. They're going to take our licenses away. They're not going to think I'm a good therapist. And what that means is we don't talk about it. And if you view other providers this way, what does it say about the people we treat? So I think that really, we as mental health clinicians, and those of you who might be studying to be mental health clinicians, we need to change our practice. We need to ask, not just, do you have a family history of suicide? Have you had a suicide attempt? But really, what does that mean to you? If you've been close to someone that's died by suicide. You've attempted suicide, how are you staying alive? Who did you tell? How do you make meaning of that? It's important to think about how each one of us personally is connected to this continuum. This is the people that we've lost to suicide, and the attempt survivors, and then their loved ones who are still here, and the turtle and the glove. Who has no connection to suicide that I know of. Wasn't part of our study. But it's important because it's a lot of us. These are people that have had a profound impact on my life. And I know you all are people who fill in the picture. Want to leave on resources that are available in your community and nationwide. Like I said before, BYU CAPS, phone number is 801-422-3035. They said that anyone who needs to meet with a counselor today, they can get you in. So please see me or one of the faculty members you know, and we can find a way to make that happen. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a number every one of you should have in your phone, so you can give your friends if you need it, 1-800-273-TALK, which is the number down at the bottom right. And then the number at the top right is crisis text line, 741-741. If you text them, you can just start the conversation, and someone will get back to you 24 hours a day. And that's something that's really good. If you're in a place where you can't talk and you just want to text, so many of us like to text so much better than we like to talk these days. But if you're a kid and you're in school, you can go in the bathroom and text. And you don't have to have a conversation on the phone with someone. But hopefully these are resources that you can use to help people in your community and people who you care about so that we don't have more of these experiences. Thanks so much.
Say a few things more about postvention,
sure.
Particularly in light of what our community suffered last month. We've been kind of struggling, as faculty and students, what could we have done better in the immediate aftermath of our loss?
Postvention, so the question, I don't know if in the back you guys can hear, the question is, can I speak a little bit more about postvention, especially given the struggles that BYU's community have had in the last month after the loss. Postvention is anything that happens after suicide, and is thought of as prevention for the next generation, intervention, essentially. Postvention is really difficult to figure out because we don't have lots of data-based models of what everyone should do. The evidence just really isn't there. But based on our work, what we suggest for people is really not just focusing on the people that we think are closest to someone who dies by suicide, but leaving it up for a community to say, were you close? Or do you feel like you were close? Or do you feel like the suicide had an impact on you? Are you having symptoms of PTSD? Are you having nightmares? Or do you feel like you have to re-experiencing it? And getting people into help with that. So it sounds like there's a lot of really amazing, thoughtful work that was done on the campus, both student-initiated as well as faculty and administration initiated, and really bringing people together, having specific question?
Well, I mean, we struggled the days immediately following. I mean, there was this old kind of model that it's contagion and don't talk too much about it. And some of us pushed back on that. We felt like we needed to say something. We needed to reach out to students. The students needed to be able to talk. But we didn't feel like we had the tools or the background. We didn't want to do harm.
Right. And it's hard to figure out, you know, we don't want to glorify suicide as a cause of death and say that someone that dies by suicide, you know, that solved all their problems, everybody's happy. Clearly that's not the case. But I think the idea that, and also understanding that it's not like someone is going to be struggling, see somebody else die by suicide, and suddenly they're going to go, oh, what a great idea. I could do that. That just isn't going to happen if we talk about suicide. What seems to happen with clustering and contagion is that when someone dies by suicide and it isn't addressed, and so like someone dies and everybody feels like nothing's better, and they're just not here anymore, so maybe it's better for them. That seems to be one of the factors when clustering and contagion happens, or when kind of their death is glorified. And, oh, they're not suffering anymore, and how amazing is it that they've kind of come up with a solution, which clearly is never the case. And so I think kind of not talking about the way they died in a lot of detail, but really talking about the person and the good and the bad things about them in the way that we would after anyone's dead. We remember the good and the bad. We don't just erase them completely. And I think with suicide a lot of the time, that's what happens. People don't know what to say, so they say nothing. So people who are bereaved feel even worse because suddenly this person is gone and erased because no one feels like they can say anything. There's a question there.
Yeah, first, thank you so much for coming. And I just had a quick question about, I heard after what happened here at BYU, there were some stories from people who felt like they needed help, and they called the suicide prevention hotline, and because they fit into the bereaved category or affected, they called multiple times and they said, are you feeling like you are going to...
Please hold, 60 minutes later.
And they said, yeah, we're not here to help you, we're here to help you for it. And so my question is, are there initiatives for specifically getting, so that people know that even if maybe they are not personally experiencing suicidal ideation or those effects, but they just need somebody to talk to about the grief side.
Right.
So like any initiative to help those people so they don't feel like they're being turned away.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I think most of us, when we don't know, think that suicide prevention lifelines like 911. And we can call them and like immediately help us and everyone's lives are saved. And it's not like that. It's funded in such a scattered way. Each center has their own funding, and then they're accredited by Lifeline, and the amount of money they get is shockingly small. And so so that's our approach to treating people who might be at acute risk of suicide. We're doing a lot better job for them than people bereaved because we don't have anything that's national and coordinated. There's some online support groups. I don't know locally what kind of support groups are available. You can look those up on suicidology.org. But support groups aren't for everyone. And if it's the middle of the night and you just want to talk, that's not the right way to go. And sometimes support groups, you have to wait, you have to go there, you have to listen to other people tell their stories. We're just not doing a good job of helping people yet who really want to tell their story and want to talk. Hopefully we'll get there soon.